Hi everyone, and welcome back to another video from Dorraine. So today we are going to talk a little bit about cultural forms, and when we talk about cultural forms, we are talking about the traditional forms, the rituals, the ceremonies and practices that we'll all engage in, and of course they're right across the Caribbean in many ways than most of us would think. So for example, you have week. Some of us know it as set up 9-night. We call it at different names, yes, but the overall term is week. And that can be found in many different Caribbean islands, or however it is that it is practiced. We talk about the revivals, Kumina, Carnival, stick fighting, and these can be found across a range of territories. You know them, just go and do your research and we'll see what we are talking about. So we're going to talk about storytelling specifically today. Sometimes we don't think that storytelling is a cultural form, but it is a cultural form, because there are different ways in which it is practiced in the different cultures, and how it is that we capture, how we live as a people through storytelling. Now, if we have persons out there who are working through the CSEC syllabus, it would have broken it down in several different parts in terms of how we can look at it and the various things that we're looking for. And so today I'm going to start by looking at some of the physical elements that you can find in the cultural forms. And when we think about the physical elements, we're thinking about the paraphernalia, we're thinking about music, we're thinking about sound, we're thinking about movement, we're thinking about props, we're thinking about dress, costumes, those things, and we're just going to quickly talk about those. The thing about storytelling as a cultural form is that it doesn't tie itself to all of these different physical elements. Yes, it is because of how it is that it is staged and how it is done by the storyteller. So when we think about storytelling, what exactly do we think storytelling is? And it's, as it is, telling of stories, one of those oral narrative. And in many of our ways of growing up as children, and I know when I was growing up, I heard a lot of stories from my grandparents, and so grandparents are usually the gatekeepers of stories and responsible for passing them on from generation to generation. So first we're going to look at the paraphernalia. So when we think about paraphernalia, what exactly are we talking about? We are speaking about those must-haves, the things that make the cultural form what it really is. So you can't substitute it, or you won't substitute. So for example, if you're looking at wake or 9-night, say everybody want them good old white rum. So of course, we're looking at those as a paraphernalia. If we're looking at revival, everybody wants good old croton flowers. Yes, you're not going to go without that. If you're looking at your stick fighting, you must have your stick. That is what we talk about with paraphernalia, the must-haves within the cultural form. And of course, the other things are optional. And of course, when we start talking about props, then we'll talk about those things. All right. Beside the paraphernalia, as a matter of fact, within storytelling, you don't necessarily need to have paraphernalia, because it's not about, there's no must-have, so to speak. So as the teller of the story, you will determine what it is that you need to make your story work. And the reason for this sometimes is because the stories are different and they have different demands. Yes, the general principle of some stories might be the same, but in terms of the demands of what the story is, the teller determines what exactly do I want to tell this story, to make it engaging for my audience, and also to ensure that as I tell these different stories, everybody will get a full understanding of what it is that is being said. Beside the paraphernalia, you have also other elements such as music. Again, with storytelling, it depends on what the story is about. So there's no specific music aligned to telling stories. And so if you're telling a story as a teller and you think that there's a music that you want to include in your story, you can go ahead and tell that story and include the music. So for example, I'm going to show you a quick clipping of a story that Amina Blackwood Meeks, and everybody knows her as the queen of storytelling in Jamaica and maybe within the Caribbean. So I'm going to show you a short clipping of a section of a story that she's telling, and how she utilized a song in that story just to help to enhance the story and to give the message. So take a look at it.
Rat! And when the liquor brother look round to see where the rat was, and him look round again, the liquor bigger brother gone with the meat out of him plate. And him used to play those kinds of tricks all the time on him liquor brother. Until one day, in the way Master God other him world, them mother gone on to the next world, and them father gone on to the next world, and left everything them have without a will. When me father da go dead, him never make no will, but him left one cow for the whole away, and the bigger brother rat it way from him liquor brother. Him never stop and stop until him take away everything where the father and the mother dead left and say, all these are mine.
All right, so there you have it. I hope you got a full understanding of what it is that we mean when we talk about using the music in storytelling. And so we're going to talk a little bit about sounds. Now, within storytelling, this is a little bit funny. Sound is grounded in language. Yes, the sound within storytelling, that is grounded in language. And what do I mean by that? It simply means whenever the storyteller is telling the story, he or she will say certain words, and the words would give you the idea of what the sound is, or however it is phrased. So for example, you may talk about, the story might say to you, and boy, me say in the middle of the thing, we just give him one lick, whop, whop. So whop is a word, yes, it's language, but it connotates a certain kind of sound. So anybody is listening and hear, we give them a lick, whop. That's the sound of it. So you listening that story get a great idea as to exactly what the lick feel like and what the lick sound like. And so basically it is tapping into what to call it in language, onomatopoeic kind of thing, that kind of sound. And you have another one called idiophones or something like that, where you speak the word and it gives you a clear idea without much explanation. So you're tapping into that as a storyteller to tell your story. So there again is no specific sound that is associated with story. It's up to you. Additionally, as the storyteller, you might want to incorporate sounds, and it's a way you can engage your audience. So for example, what if you decide that this is a sound that you want, and you're rubbing your hands together and you ask your audience to do it? What is that sound supposed to create? What if you want a snap of the fingers? Yeah. And you want your audience to snap with you as you go along, because the choral sound might tell you something, right? You can decide on those kinds of sounds. So then again, sound is dependent on the nature of the story, or whether or not the storyteller wants to use that to enhance it. And by thinking about sounds, it might take you into the theatrical aspect of it, because once the storyteller starts adding sound, that's getting into soundscaping. So it's using soundscaping and audience interaction just to help, yes, with the telling of the story. And that is how we look at sounds whenever it is that we are looking at storytelling. What other paraphernalia? Dress. Again, physical elements. Sorry, when we think about dress, again, we are going into costumes. The truth is, there's no specific dress code for storytelling. It's up to you as the storyteller. So whatever it is that you are telling your story about, you determine what kind of dress code you want to wear when you are telling that story. The same goes for props. Now, props are not mandatory. Again, the type of prop is up to you, again, as the storyteller. And that's one of the things about storytelling when it comes to the physical element. It is open. It is so broad. It's open for a lot of choices from whomever the teller is. And so this lends itself for it to be used creatively, yes, and theatrically in many ways, because there are so many things that you can add to your story to enhance your story in whatever way it is that you want. Again, when you think about the choice of people, it's about the storyteller, it's about the audience. However, when you think about the various roles that are played, you have to think about the storyteller as the teller of the story. You have to think about the storyteller as the performer. And so the storyteller will wear two hats. So for example, the storyteller is going to be switching from what? Telling the story and becoming the characters in the story that he or she is actually talking about. And so when you think about the roles within the storytelling, you have to think about those two separately, as well as the role that the audience will play in the telling of the story. So therefore, when we think about the physical elements of the story, those are the things that we are talking about. But there's also the movement. Again, storytelling doesn't have a specific movement or dance the way revival will have a specific movement and you have to learn the revival movement, or stick fighting comes with a certain movement. No, it doesn't. However, the storyteller in their mode of telling that story will do particular movements that will allow you to better get the clear image of what it is that he or she is trying to tell you. Again, I'm going to show you another snippet from this video from Amina Blackwood Meeks as she tells the story, and just look at the small snippet and look at the various actions and tell me how those actions assist you in getting the image of exactly what she's trying to tell you.
Him liquor brother, the liquor bigger one, and him never see him wife. And him start to walk all over Yalas and look for him wife and look for him little bigger brother until he came upon this place where there were 2 heaps of salt. A little heap of salt and a little bigger heap of salt. And to him did little, him sit down upon the little heap of salt and him start one piece of crying. Him cry and him bawl and him holler, and the tears came out of his eyes, and there it was so much that it grew up in a puddle round him foot till it start melt with the salt until it became a salt pond, and him still a cry and him still a cry till the salt pond swallow him up.
All right, so there you have it. I just wanted to put in the comment section, what is it that you thought about those movements? Did they assist you in any way? Yes, to understand the imagery that is being created or that was being created. I want you to look at it and tell me. So now that we've looked at all of those physical elements, we're going to be looking at the symbolic elements within the storytelling. And the first one, we want to look at some of those ritualistic elements because it's important for us to make that kind of distinction. And when we talk about a ritual, we're talking about something that is repetitive, that happens consistently and constantly. Now, one of the things we have to recognize about storytelling, it's the power of its longevity. Because storytelling is as old as human existence. As far as we know, stories are always being told, right? And a number of these stories would have survived because they've been passed down over and over and over. So it's that constant repetitiveness of the stories, and oftentimes they are told for the same reasons, and sometimes new reasons are developed. And so it's very ritualistic in nature. But a part of the ritual has to do with how the stories are started and how it is that they are ended. So for example, here in Jamaica, whenever we are starting stories, you'll hear crick. That's the storyteller will say that, and the audience will say crack. So crick, crack, crick, crack. And so that's how the storyteller will start the story before getting into the actual content and body of the story. And then at the end of the story, the storyteller in Jamaica would say, Jack Mandora, me not choose none. Again, Jack Mandora, me not choose none. And usually it is believed that that was said at the end because of the nature of storytelling to poke, to ridicule and to poke satire at others. And so that is said because the teller of the story is saying, listen, me no support nothing what me just say. Me just tell one story. Me never call nobody name. I am just telling this story. So you can't hold me accountable for anything that I just said on stage, right? And so that's how stories are told in Jamaica. Let us hear from you, wherever you are in the Caribbean, what happened when a story starts and when a story ends. And so I'm going to ask Alicia to tell us exactly how stories are started in St. Lucia, right? You know, so I'm going to tell her about me really don't want to cuss no bad word. And so because me don't want to cuss no bad word, I'm going to allow her to tell us how we started and how we end it. So Alicia.
Hi Miss, how are you doing?
I'm quite fine. So I want you to share with us in that nice French Creole. Yes. In St. Lucia, what do you say when you start story and when you end the story?
So for us in St. Lucia, when we start a story, which is similar to your crick crack, the storyteller would say idikui, and the audience would answer idikwa.
Idikui and
Idikwa, yes.
Okay.
There's also ting ting. That's what the storyteller would say, and the audience responds boishes.
So that last one, boishes.
Boishes.
Okay, so ting ting,
Boishes.
boishes.
And of course, to end the story, you say the Jack Mandora, and I can't see the last line in Jamaican.
Me no choose none. Try it. Say it.
Jack Mandora, me no choose none. But for us, it will Tutsakiole Nipude Sanaba. So it's Tutsakiole. So everything that's up, Nipude Sanaba must come down.
Lisha, slowly. Let me repeat. Slowly, please. Let's go again.
Tutsa Kiole Nipu Desan Aba.
You know me not answer that by myself. You can't do that because the bad word.
So it's essentially saying everything that up must come down, everything that starts must come to an end, and that sort of thing. So they generally end the story like that. But what we must also remember is that because of our culture, our history, and the different parts of St. Lucia, some parts of the island, when you go and you hear storytelling, so they might say it that way. Another part, they might have a different ending. So while the beginnings are generally the same, but the endings might vary depending on the community where you go to that's telling the story and the storyteller and what they add to it. So that's the kind of difference that you may get in it.
Nice. You see, and that is the kind of richness that happens within the Caribbean. We say ting ting
washes. That's right.
Ting ting washes. No, that's the kind of richness that happens in the Caribbean, and I believe somewhere in Barbados or something like that, there's something about crick crap, monkey broke your back or something to that effect. And another one at the end, Antigua and the jump on the wire and the wire bend, or that's how the story ends.
That's how the story ends.
I may be saying it wrong, so all my Caribbean peeps, please don't cut off my neck, please don't kill me, but jump in the comment section and educate me, please. Let me know what exactly it is that you say in your part of the Caribbean whenever you're starting a story, whenever you're ending a story. I will just put the caption for what Lisha would have said because I can't repeat it for you. So let us just continue sharing so we can all enjoy these different richness of the Caribbean cultural forms that we have within the Caribbean. And so that kind of repetitiveness is a part of the overall ritual that happens within the story, right? Whenever the story is telling. And that is why it's a symbolic element, because the crick crack and the Jackman door, they symbolize something. That is why it's very symbolic. And storytelling by itself is also very symbolic, because it's not always, the story is not always as the story says. There's always that underlying message and a reason for the story. Hence, why the story is like that. So having said that, we've spoken about the ritualistic element. We are now going to speak a little bit about the historic element, and I'm going to try to be as brief and detailed as possible when we talk about the historic element. Now, when we think about historical elements, we want to look at you want to look at the origin. So you don't want to talk about the historic significance or elements of storytelling and not talk a little bit about the origin. And we know that within the Caribbean, most of the stories that we have in the Caribbean would have come to us from parts of Africa, especially when we look at the folk heroes that we have. For example, one of the main folk heroes we have in the Caribbean is the Anansi, yes, and that character would have come to us from the African continent. And so that is how we would have had some of those. When the enslaved were brought here from the Caribbean, from Africa, they would have carried with them their own stories. And these stories that they would have carried with them is what they would have shared among each other. And so the stories kind of represented the faces of the people who were here. One of the important things for us to also look at in looking at this historical element is how it is that these stories were able to thrive and develop and evolve here within the Caribbean. Remember that when the enslaved were brought to the Caribbean, they all came from different tribes. And the fact that they came from different tribes, they're all going to come with their stories. Now, by virtue of the fact that they're all interacting with each other, that interaction is going to lead to a certain kind of sharing in the interaction of culture, etc. And so with that kind of consistent sharing and a way of preserving identity, right, they would have held on to these stories, and so those stories would have would have been passed on, and so those stories without a doubt would have lived. And so that's also one of the things you want to look at historically when we think about it. But importantly, you must realize too that in adapting to this new environment within which they lived, here within the Caribbean, they would have to just incorporate other things from the space within stories, because that's one of the things about stories. Stories in telling and retelling, it can be adopted for different situations and circumstances. And so a part of that adaptation within this new environment is that they would have included other things within the stories. And we have to remember that it's not only the Africans who came here, yeah? We also had the indentured people and the Europeans who were here. That is why in these day and age, sometimes you'll hear some people start their stories with once upon a time. That's not an African, thing. That's very European in its origin, but it's very much a part of our stories. But that is how the various faces of the people who are here in the Caribbean, that kind of mix up and melting pot, would have created that which we have as story historically. Now, a part of the preservation and the development of stories within the Caribbean had to do with slaves being left alone without interference. And this happened during the time whenever the slave masters would have their own revelry, whenever there's their holidays. And so the slaves would use these moments to have their own revelries and have fun. And a part of having fun and that would be the storytelling component, because that was a major form of entertainment for the enslaved, and so they would do those stories. But more specifically, when you look at the structure of what was happening on the plantation, the slaves who were disabled and maimed and couldn't work, the elderly people who were at home, along with very small children who were not in the fields working but were at home, the younger ones would stay with these older ones. And of course, during those periods of time, stories would have been told to the younger ones, who would then grow up learning these stories and share them and continue to pass them on. And so the structure of the plantation in that way and how it was organized assisted with that kind of significance. So the significance historically is the preservation of the stories and how it is that the structure of the plantation assisted with that kind of preservation. One of the things about the stories is what the stories were used for, because the stories were used sometimes to teach these small children lessons and valuable things about society and just how we make sense of the world. So when you talk about why is it that dog don't like puss? Yeah, that's a story. We always hear people talking about puss and dog, a fight, or you live like puss and dog. And so through stories, we can understand that kind of phenomenon within our society and within the environments. Of course, the older persons would have passed these on to the younger individuals. And then one crucial thing about the thriving of stories within the Caribbean is that, remember, for the enslaved, a number of their practices were banned, these cultural practices. So the drummings, etc., singing, those things were banned. However, the storytelling was seen as very harmless. And because stories were seen as harmless, then the enslaved were able to continue this practice of laughing and talking and telling their stories. And because they were able to do that without much interference, you find that the storytelling culture thrived within the Caribbean at that point. Hence, you realize that it continued to develop within the Caribbean. But you also want to look at other purposes and meaning of the cultural form of storytelling within the Caribbean. And one of them, you want to look at storytelling, what it was used for, because it was one of those medium that the enslaved or people generally used to express their own grievance, to deliver social criticism, and and to ridicule without having any backlash. It's just like when you go to the theater to watch a play. When you go to watch plays, what you find happening is that issues that are within society are often written about and performed on stage, and we get a chance to watch all of that and enjoy ourselves. The same thing happened with stand-up comedies. When you go to watch stand-up comedy, you see a lot of satire, you see a lot of ridicule regarding something that's happening in society without the fear of backlash. And so that's what was happening with some of the enslaved. During the storytelling, it was a means to express these kinds of grievance. What was also happening is that they could also do it to talk about any other social issue within society. So any form of scandal or corruption that was happening with different people within a community, and it hush. So nobody don't want to talk loud, because everybody is afraid that they might be held accountable or for backlash. Through stories, they can say exactly what they think and feel about these different scandal and corruptions, yeah, that were happening within a particular community, and the stories provided that avenue for them to be able to do that. But another important thing is what the stories represent for the people, the audience alike, as well as the teller. So for example, when you think about the trickster character, you think about what Anansi represents. It's that psychological implication and meaning that it has for people within this space. Now, here in this space, they were all enslaved in this particular space. And so think about what Anansi would mean for them psychologically as a trickster. And so Anansi in that space would have been somewhat revered, because what it does, it says to us that Anansi, who is the little man, represents us, the enslaved. And when he outsmart the stronger and bigger animals, who would then be seen maybe as the background masters on the plantation, the people get to love Anansi, because psychologically that is what Anansi represents for them, you know. And it's very much connected to our own saying here in Jamaica, "You're little but a talawa." That was the Anansi for them within these stories. So that is psychological conditions, yeah, under which these people were operating, why the stories were very important. And one of the other things about story in its symbolic element historically is that they are educational. Yeah, they are educational. They reveal their frustration and one's attempt to escape from this space in the world of the imaginative. And that is how you try to do it, because you want to use it to tell how you feel. Yes, and so the story provides that means of escape. But additional stories were also used as a way to teach morals and values and attitudes, yeah, to children. And that's how you pass it on. So almost like you use it to discipline children. So you may not beat, but you might tell a story to a child about something that would have happened similar to what the child maybe would have done. And so out of the story, the child is expected to do what? Learn that lesson. And that is why the arts is often seen as such a powerful tool for teaching, because it allows you to look back at yourself and also can look back at your actions. So it's very reflective in nature, and that's one of the power of storytelling. And so when you look at all of these historical significance in terms of, you know, teaching the moral and the values, preserving one's identity, preservation of culture, voicing one grievance, and the fact that this little folk era Anansi represents us, the small people who will outsmart the bigger and the stronger animals. It is really important for us to be able to tap into that and understand the environment within which the enslaved were living, why these stories naturally would have survived. If you have anything else that you agree with me, just put something in the comment section. If you think that you're not agreeing with the fact that this is what story meant for some people, also put it in the chat. If you want to add anything that I would have left out, please go ahead and put it right in the comment section, and let us have a conversation about the historical representation or symbolic value of storytelling here within the Caribbean. And so the last thing we're going to discuss under the symbolic element of the cultural form is the economic aspect of the storytelling. Now, one of the things about storytelling and the economic value is that storytelling was always very popular form of entertainment. And of course, it was not monetized, yeah? And so persons used to just do it as a form of entertainment, to, you know, passing of time, etc. However, over time, what you realize happening is that we have now professional storytelling tellers, and we have storytelling festivals. We find them across the world, and various workshops that persons are now paying for. They are now teaching these different courses. And in essence, what I'm trying to say is that storytelling has now become something that is quite monetized in many different ways. Even in today's contemporary society, if you go anywhere online, you'll see people advertising different storytelling sessions, training session, workshops, and what it can do for you. And so that kind of commercialization aspect of storytelling is something that is more current, but it was never something of the past. And of course, in putting on a number of these festivals, it's going to require sponsorship, or it's going to take money. And so people tend to go the route of sponsorship, and just other means, raising funds in order to be able to get these get the funding. People will have their shows and invite the storytellers to perform, and of course they have to pay them, because of course they are now the professional storytellers. So it is not the same as before, where it was just a community pastime and anybody could participate. Today anybody could participate, but it might cost you a little penny. And so when you think about the economic aspect, you think about the commercialization component of storytelling. Now, please to put your comments in the comment section, and let us talk some more. Let us continue the dialogue. I will do part 2 as we will continue talking about storytelling, because there are so many more things to say. But this is where part 1 ends. So see you next time. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to my channel. Until you hear from me again, you take care.